have Professor Pratap Bhanu Mehta, who is an academic, and he was the former Vice Chancellor of Ashoka University. His background is in political science, but he talks also on philosophy. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And I have to bring in my personal bias here. I am a regular reader of Professor Mehta's pieces in the newspapers here. He writes in the editorial pages of Indian Express, yes, and other.
You're being very kind. You're being very kind.
Not at all. Not at all. Your pieces are extremely. They're just so clear, and you know, you talk about your pieces don't get sentimental or emotional, and yet there are that humane side to the brain side. Sorry. And then Matthew, we have an artist here, Ina Kaur, and she was once a participating artist in a program that CIMA Gallery does with 3 cultural agencies. It's known as the Indo-European Artist Residency. Yeah. And Ina was one year a participating artist from India at this residency, which is held in the residencies in Calcutta, and artists from Germany and from France. And this year we had an artist from Great Britain also. And next year, the next time we do it, we hope to have an artist from Italy. Yeah, because the Italians are joining us. And we have the director of the German Cultural Agency, Goethe Institute, Max Müller Bhavan here, Friso Marker. He isn't on the screen, I know he's here. And then we have Pratik Raja, who that's one of the exciting galleries in India.
I have. Thank you.
So Matthew, would you like to begin with your thoughts on do you think art is important, unimportant? Especially at
Sorry, you're choppy. Who are you addressing, me or somebody else?
No, I'm addressing you, Matthew. Wondering if you would like to start off the discussion with
yeah,
a brief
happy
your
to.
own thoughts about 4 minutes. Yeah.
Okay. Don't even know if I need that long. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a curator and a writer here in New York City. And I operate an independent office, which is dated a building exclusively with artist studios. So I'm surrounded by working artists all day. And just the other day was the first time since March that we were able to see one another in person since we had closed our offices for quarantine. And we were sitting on the roof having a drink together, about 5 of them, talking about this very thing, since have been more seriously affected by this crisis than my own, meaning that their galleries are temporarily closed. Those of them that have exhibitions with museums, either here in the US, but even abroad, in China, in Europe, in South America, those exhibitions have at the moment been postponed, but my guess is that eventually some of them will be canceled. And the question of whether art is necessary or relevant in a pandemic, I think, is almost it's not the question we should be ourselves. Art is always purposeful and relevant. It's not, I don't, in my view anyway, it's not adversely affected in terms of its production by any conditions other than someone's ability or willingness or need to make art. And most of the artists whom I know and admire don't decide to make art. They are artists and create art because that's what they do. That's how they live life. It's not
Right.
it's not a career. It's not so and of course, which is not to say that if you're not able to go to your studio and you work with certain kinds of materials that can't affect your ability to make work, all it does is it affect your ability to make work the way you have been making work. Any artist can figure out how to keep making things, you know, with what's lying around their house, what's in the refrigerator, whatever. You know, the ability to adapt and create is not something that I think is ever successfully suppressed. What I do think is in jeopardy is the art market and galleries and not so much because of the economic downturn that's being created places because of the COVID crisis, but because if they're unable to imagine a way to adapt moving forward. In other words, this idea of going back to the way things were across the board, I think is a very useless idea, very lazy idea, because we can't go back to the way things were because the way things were isn't the way things are, and it's not the way things will be. So our ability to adapt, change, and evolve is key here. And what I see Art Basel and Frieze and other international art fairs doing is not really adapting so much as putting a Band-Aid on a very serious wound, and that wound is not healing. The artists who've been asked to participate in these online ventures, which includes all of the artists that I'm working with, are profoundly unsatisfying for them. And so was speaking at another conference, Expand Museums for a Living. And many of them weren't taking into consideration that the way people congregate in public was already changing before the COVID crisis. And now the COVID crisis has hit, and what the aftermath will be is going to profoundly affect how people get together in public. I think they still will, but I don't think they'll do it in the way that we've envisioned them doing it in the 19th and 20th centuries. So that, I think, is our problem.
Pratik, do you have any thoughts on this? Because your experimenter does participate in Art Basel and the other art fairs.
Yes, that's right. I mean, to come to the topic of today's conversation, is art important in times of severe crisis? I think, I mean, it's a rhetorical question, of course, as Matthew was extremely important, and the relevance of art cannot really be undermined at this moment, especially these moments. Before I answer the question on the art fairs in today's situations, I think just to reflect back on not similar, but of course, world has changed so much over the last years. The last memorable instance of a pandemic which has really impacted the world, and people have cited this in this COVID situation as well, is the pandemic of the Spanish flu in 1918, 1920, right, very close during the World War I. And it was caused by several factors and people together, and it kind of became a pandemic. But some of the most important art was made during the time. So some of the important artists were impacted and made work. The most crucial work that comes to my mind is a work by the famous figurative painter Egon Schiele, who was Klimt's protege, but an unbelievable painter with amazing work with the sexuality and nudes. He painted this very interesting, very, very powerful work called The Family, where he painted himself, his wife, and their unborn children. I had the privilege of seeing the exhibition at the MoMA a few years ago. It was an incredible exhibition. And where he painted the family in affected by the Spanish flu. So they were very calm, but he of himself, his wife, and the unborn children. But it was the wife died 6 months into her pregnancy because of the flu, and he died 3 days later. Of course, the child, of course, died as well. And it stands as a reminder or a kind of a reportage or a kind of a marker for what the times were. So art is definitely important, and there are many ways of looking at it. And there are other examples as well. I would take. If I look at outside the situation of a pandemic, if I look at a global crisis, then I would think the World War II was a huge global crisis. Artists fled from Europe to Americas, and there was the birth of abstract expressionism. Artists looked back into themselves when everything else was empty. They relied on their own conscience, and they looked inwards and outwards, and became a movement that is what we all know so well today. And of course, across in history, many more examples have stayed and have stood the test of time, especially with terms of global crises. Coming back to what we are facing right now and how what this means to the art world, we need to think of ourselves as the root of the problem in many ways. For the responsibility of transforming is also upon ourselves. When I say ourselves, I don't mean just us. I mean the entire community of people who are traveling the world, looking at things. We need to. So there's a post-pandemic situation, the new normal, as people are calling it. We need to change our behavioral ways, and exactly what Matthew was saying. Our museums, on our public situations, our galleries adapt and change according to what is needed, the new public behavior. Having all these online activities that are being done, including things that we are doing at our end at the gallery, we reacted quite quickly to the changing situation. In March, we launched our labs, which is a multi-pronged idea of doing things online, which includes exhibitions, includes grants, includes funding, includes film exhibitions. So I know it adds a lot of already noisy web space, which is what everyone is doing. And as Matthew was saying some time ago, that the fairs are doing what they can, but they cannot replace, or as he said, adding a band-aid to the problem. It's true.
There is
But given the situation that one is facing, it is best at the moment to create a bridge to travel between what we are now to what we will be in the future. So I think we should all look at mogul and more ourselves, and that's probably going to be the future for some time at least.
Pratap, in fact, I had a very important question for you. Two questions. One was that, 30, 40 years, the world has taught us to open up, hail globalization, shatter the boundaries, and suddenly we find a world that's hurtling back to my country, my city, to isolation. How do you perceive this renewed tension between the centripetal and the centrifugal tendencies of human societies?
Thanks for this privilege. I mean, it's wonderful to be amongst so many wonderful artists and curators. I think three quick thoughts, really. One, of course, I mean, I don't think there is any question about, is art necessary or relevant, or it's almost like a transcendental aspect of the human condition.
The question, Professor Mehta, is whether it is important right now.
No, that's right. I'm coming to that, right? So I don't think we should be in any doubt, in a sense, about either the value of art or the enterprise of art. In fact, if anything, this crisis will probably generate lots of interesting experimentation, new forms. And it has already been, in some senses, even in the last 2 or 3 months, a very distinctive kind of window on our condition. In fact, art has probably captured it a lot more than, in some senses, scholarly analysis or even journalism has. If you look at how to represent suffering, if you look at demand for consolation, new aesthetic forms. I think the larger question that Rakhidi asked, I would put it this way, which is, I think 2 trends are very clear globally, which is that one, the battle between authoritarian forces and democratic and open societies is going to intensify in all different societies in the world, whether you are established democracies or whether you are existing authoritarian regimes, right? And I think the broader challenge for art, which we've been seeing at the margins in some ways in our societies, is actually going to turn on what does it mean for art to get politicized as this battle gets intensified across all our societies. We are also at the strange conjuncture, as Rakhidi said, where these 2 things are combining, which is not only are you getting more nationalism, more demand for closed borders. It's going to make the restriction movements of people certainly much, much more difficult. I think very clear indications of that. But it's also coming at a moment where internally, all of the governments that are going to be engaging in these activities are probably going to take a slightly more authoritarian approach. And I don't think we should be complacent about being able to take the kinds of freedoms we have in some senses for granted. Now, what does that mean for the art world and expression more generally? I think 2 things very quickly, right? One is, of course, I'm sure all of you have experienced in your own curatorial work. The activity of curation, mediation, creating structures of authority is always to some degree politicized, right? Let's not pretend absolutely that, right? But
yes,
I think we are now going to see a whole different level of politicization, right? Will the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of India be tweeting in the future, right? Matthew's gallery has passed this editorial comment on art, and what does it actually mean for, artistic expression? So in some senses, I think for us, the relevant contrast is actually not going to be the pandemic of 1980. Look, suffering has always been part of the human condition, and art has always accompanied it, right, in some ways. It's actually going to be the experience of what it means to do art under more authoritarian conditions. So I think that's one. The second thing I'll say, and then I'll just end there, which is I think, when I saw your question, right, and I was puzzling, I said, why is Prativi asking this question, what is the value of art? I mean, usually people who mean to ask that question either are people who cannot be convinced. You shouldn't even try, right? It's such a, and I interpreted that question to mean something slightly different, which is, that 18th century Rousseau's question to art, right? Which is that it's not about the imagination or what art can do for us. Can it console us? Can it represent? Is it an autonomous aesthetic? It is roughly the guilt that accompanies art, where you say that, look, every document of art is also a document of barbarism in some ways. It rests upon social practices of inequality, different kinds of distribution. And will we be able to allocate resources? I think Matthew is exactly right. Artists will do what they do because that's who they are. I think the question is, will there be public support? Will there be, financial support? And the opportunity costs of doing that at a time like this, right? Where art becomes emblematic of a certain kind of structure of inequality, rather than, in some sense, as a window onto a common collective life. And I think that question is also probably going to intensify. I think you can reasonably expect, both for political and financial reasons, a huge backlash against public spending on art, particularly in systems that rely a lot on public spending. I think with private galleries and, in a sense, the kind of philanthropic commitments that many in this conversation have given, I think the pressure is going to be, which is, how do we do that in imaginative ways that actually truly positions art as a kind of public good, that is actually collectively, in some senses, experienced and owned by larger numbers of people. I think this charge that art is fundamentally, even, no matter what it is, that it's fundamentally a form of elitism. I think that question is going to haunt us a little bit more. And we'll have to be, I think, creative about responding to that question.
Well, Matthew, I was wondering that, in the, you're based in America, and this institution of art in your country has literally, for the last 200 years, it has developed to a fabulous. It's taught a lot to the world as well. In Europe, it has been a lot more older, the tradition of furthering art and promoting art right from medieval times and selling art. All that. Artists became professionals actually, almost like from the times of Medici and all that. So Europe has that great grand experience of dealing with art, and America is of course fantastic. But in the face of this huge and sudden impact, a catastrophe like the pandemic, a kind of totally unprecedented kind of thing, do you think the prevalent mode of business, trade, consumption, and definitely the display of art, it is very capital intensive? Now, do you think this model will work any longer? Because, this pandemic is going to, today it's COVID-19, tomorrow it'll be something else. So now we've experienced what the effect of a pandemic can be, and it's going to live with us. And how are we in the art world in general, how are we going to confront this new situation? Because what you find is that, this heavily capital intensive way of showing art, selling art, the publicity, it's very, very capital intensive. Now, what is the way forward now for a situation like this? And we are going to live with it for a while.
Yeah. Well, hi, Rocky. And thanks for the question. We actually were discussing that very question just shortly before you were able to log into the webinar. So maybe recapitulate briefly, I would say, will it all survive? No. will there be something to the people's business? But just for the moment, I'd like to respond to an important point that Professor Mehta made at the very end of his comments in talking about the question of public funding of art under authoritarian circumstances, or even the question of public support for art in the wake of a pandemic. And my feeling, it's a very important point. I've felt for a long time in this country, but not only in this country, in Europe, in places, state support of all of the arts, not just visual, often lead to a compromise in quality, a benchmark that is measured by the lowest common denominator, the least offensive, the least controversial. And in those cases where people are a little more expansive and they're thinking at the outset, the result more often than not is something that's unacceptable to the point that the work is withdrawn from public view. On the other hand, I have seen, whether people look at the rise of private museums or not, there have been many cases of private investment, and I don't mean that in the market sense of investing in art, but rather companies that have not only created collections. For me, in the United States, best example of a back out into the public, I think I'm crazy, but it's really fantastic, is the Dallas Cowboys football team in Dallas. The owner of that team has a daughter-in-law who is in her late 30s and contemporary art. And she convinced her very conservative Republican uncle, who owns this very all-American football team that has nothing to do with culture, as probably all of you might understand it, but it has more to do with, you know, drinking beer and cowboy hats and pickup trucks and, you know, good old American yeehaw. They had to build a new stadium. Well, they hired a great architect, not a starchitect, but a really great national architect, not some corporate guy from, you know, one of the Dallas businesses buddy for him. And then they commissioned, I think it's 30 or 40 contemporary artists in the world to make work that was site-specific in the stadium. And that includes people like Mel Bachner and Jenny Holzer, and the list is long. I imagine if you were to go and look at the football team's website, there would be a link to guide you through this. It's a combination of commissioning and buying. They bought works of art for private spaces, but the more important thing is the public spaces where people walk into the stadium, where people congregate to eat. Anyway, not to belabor that point, but the main point is that I think that example is already almost 20 years old, I think, is something that should be looked at as replacing. I think we did away with public support for the arts in this country in the 1990s when we took away individual grants for artists. That was immediately replaced by foundations, businesses that do that sort of thing. And I think that's probably an appropriate model, because unfortunately, if you take public money in a country that doesn't have a tradition of art being synthesized into daily life, which is our tradition, not the European tradition or the Indian subcontinent or any of the older cultures in the world. But in America, you know, if somebody has a reproduction of Grant Wood in their kitchen, that's pretty good. the number of people who really consume and live with art in this country is probably, in that 1% that gets thrown around when one talks about wealth. So I certainly don't see where public funding, there's a lot of criticism of UK and Germany and several other countries in the pandemic recovery bills. There have been criticisms about the amount of money that's been allocated or not allocated for culture. And I think this is where business has to pick up all, because there isn't enough to reach the infrastructure necessary to support the art market if you start creating an artificial means of support for culture. And I do think that public support is by and large a kind of artificial lifeline for production, because it's not a business. There is no, means of production that employs it. I don't want to get too lost in that, but I did think that question of public support is extremely important to look at.
Well, Friso, you're a bridge between India and Germany at the moment. You're heading the Max Weber Bhavan in Calcutta. Now, Germany has traditionally been a country, especially in the post-World War II scenario. You've been a country which has really used art to restructure society. And just tell me, how are you, as you're part of the government, so how are you responding to this crisis? Germany is doing a great job fighting the COVID, but in this pandemic situation, you've always traditionally used art in a big way, for all your restructuring. How are you using art now, in the current times?
Thank you very much, Raki. And first of all, thank you very much to CIMA for inviting me to this illustrious panel. And I just want to clarify, I'm not part of the government. Goethe Institute is not a government agency. We are an individual body that has contracts with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And also, before going to the question of how art is used, I think I want to contradict Professor Mehta a little bit, because I do think that in these times it is a very valid question to ask, is art important in these times as well? And just to illustrate that, maybe a little personal experience. In 2011, I was posted in Ivory Coast, which was in a war situation at that time. It was a civil war, and the first 6 months I couldn't enter. And when I finally entered, you could, the war was just over. There were still the holes in the roads where they burned people alive. 3,000 people dead in Abidjan alone. And so here I come, first posting in West Africa with the task of doing cultural programs. And I indeed asked myself also, and obviously also a lot of other people asked me, what are we doing now? Is it even important to have art? Is it important to have an exhibition or maybe a culture program in general? And so we started with an exhibition together with UNICEF on children. And I also asked a lot of people who came to that, and then also the following events we did, if they thought that it was important for them that there were culture programs. And the answer was a very clear yes, for quite a few reasons. And these reasons were various, from that it took their minds off the hardships of the everyday life, but not in a way to banalize it as pure entertainment, because I think what art does is it still It might entertain, but it still asks us questions and sometimes also provides answers to situations where we are lacking the words. So I think it is very important that art exists also in these times, and that also is one of the reasons why I think that public funding is obviously not only important for the arts, but will also continue to be given to the arts. At least I can say that for Germany, there are very clear signs from the government that they want to continue, especially in these times where all the governments around the world are lacking funds and don't get the money that they usually have in order to spend. Because they also feel that it is very important. One question that this situation though gives me, and we are also one of those organizers of events which now obviously happen on the digital platform, is the question, at what point will we actually start thinking about art for this digital, I don't know if we can call it era or whatever, because from what I see so far is basically that everybody is using the internet as a channel, but even like this, what we're doing right at the moment is transferring a podium discussion, which usually might have happened at CIMA Gallery, onto another medium. So we're using the internet just as a medium, but so far I've not seen anybody who, or very, very few attempts at actually coming up with ideas of creating something for this medium. Like in previous times, people have developed means of using a canvas or an instrument. So I think that is one of the many questions, obviously, that comes with this time that we're facing at the moment.
Well,
Maybe
immediately after Friso, I would go to the two artists, practicing artists. Let us get their point of view. Now, Sreshi and Ina, I'm asking you the questions. You can answer one by one, whatever. Do artists really reflect to times immediately? Do you do that? I mean, that was one of the crucial parts of our debate, discussion, that, does art reflect the times? But as artists, practicing artists, how do you relate to your immediate times?
Yes, I believe that artists, they can relate to their times, because you see the history, it's a kind of document in arts and art that they have really participated and produced things even in the time of pandemic or any kind of situation. But I feel myself that this kind of situation, this strange time, it is producing two kinds of art. One is a very lighter, and the other is, it has got a lighter side, like with memes and cartoons, and also there is a serious side. Lighter things we come and we enjoy, we share, that is okay. But I think aftermath is the word which we can really digest, and we can produce something very serious out of this situation. Because I myself can give an example. The work I was doing, I started it before all this kind of lockdown and all. So when I started, I wasn't at all aware about the total situation, what is going to come upon us. So while working, I suddenly found that the sounds, the imageries, the noise that I hear all around me, it's about Corona, COVID, all kinds of things, that actually, I took things, but I've unknowingly, it surfaced in my work as letters. So what I felt is that artists just cannot remain in their own cocoon all the time. They are also I mean, they are reflecting all the time. I'll give you one funny example of, I found that in internet, as Riso said, that it is a medium, and truly it is a medium for this time, because artists are communicating uh, more fast and more deeply than before through internet. We are exchanging, sharing ideas and all. But the Kalighat painter, a Potua painter, a folk painter from Kalighat, he has given a twist to an images of Babu Bibi. He has put the Babu and Bibi, the man and his wife or consort, in two chairs, and they are wearing typical masks of the time, and there is a corona ball in between them, signifying social distance. And I found it to be very amusing, because that is, that kind of thing the Patuas are doing very fast, very rapid, because they are always a chronicler. I mean, that is the spirit. But for an artist of our type, we reflect or we plan and then we start working. Maybe it can be something spontaneous, but still, the proximity of the event, we artists, we just cannot deny. It comes into the work. And I believe that art has the power to fight the situation, to renew, and what else? It has got the power. So it is art is not an isolated phenomenon even in this time, because the famous one, Picasso's Guernica of the Spanish Civil Wars, or Goya's disasters series, the lithographs, they actually uphold what happened at that time. So I think for serious works, we need time, and I cannot also deny Kiefer's works. So for serious kind of artists, I think we need the time to precipitate it, and then we can produce. That is my viewpoint about.
Ina, what do you have to say about it?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me. And I think some of the good points have already been made. I'll start with what Matthew was saying.
How do you reflect your times? Do you reflect to it? And
yes. So as an artist, I'm seconding what, I mean, as an artist, I have a style, I have a medium, I have an expression, and I will definitely continue that. And we are impacted by it. But I think because of these severe times, we definitely are re-evaluating and questioning the past. And I think for a lot of artists, this current situation also becomes their context. They start working within their capabilities and within their skill sets. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to continue to revise. I mean, artists are known to also shift and adapt. And they can have two parallel works or engagements and reflections because of these severe times and being sensitive. And I think that artists and creative practitioners or creative thinkers are very resourceful individuals, and they shift. And I've seen that we have engaged in a very selfless, unprecedented matter in addition to or in separate to our ongoing practices in a form of volunteering or activism, through community surveys, through collaboration, through social art practices, and many more of the relevant things which we do. I mean, and some of us just do it out of this pain or perhaps the impact we feel. But I think the most important question or what COVID has brought to light is it has showed us that art is actually very essential for our collective and our individual well-being. So as we continue our practice and being sensitive and telling stories, I mean, creative practitioners, I mean, photographers, performers, storytellers, educators are all engaging with this, which is either an extension of their practice or independent of that. So, I mean, yeah.
Ina, you were saying that, we're also in a time where everyone seems to think it's easy to be an artist. Like everyone thinks they can be a photographer thanks to our phones. You know, we are all taking pictures. We've all become photographers, right?
What's the question? I'm sorry.
So, I mean, everyone now seems to think that being an artist, or you know, is nothing special. It's not, because like I gave the example of, you know, photography. Now, thanks to our phones, we have all become photographers. We're all taking pictures. Yeah. So,
Yes.
I mean, the role of the artist in society, in, you know, how has that changed? Has
I mean,
become
people have
important?
gotten access to this tool, which is accessible, and yes, everybody is taking pictures, if we take that as an example, or Instagramming and Facebooking.
Yeah.
But I think that
Right.
there's clearly a very clear distinction between a passerby or a person who is engaged and either has been affected or researching or in depth having a contextual inquiry, and then producing work in response to you know, their engagement, and that kind of a work is, I mean, it could be anything. It can't be just one thing, whether it is about connecting people, or recording histories, or, you know, challenging the systems, or just like reflecting their inner truth or truth in general, or against, I mean, so I think that there's definitely a distinction between perhaps a hobbyist or a person who use apps and technology and just taking pictures. So in my mind, I mean, it's a very clear distinction as to even if you end up taking good pictures or you have an inclination of it, there is something more than just the visual or the subject and the technique. So when you have a combination of all this plus your intent or your passion and your skill set is what will be far more than just every person taking a picture or expressing themselves. And I mean, I don't know if I answered.
Well, Ina and Sreyashi, again, I'm asking same questions to you. Now, you're a practicing artist, and a lot of artists are doing huge works, large-scale works. Now, do you think the present kind of virtual shows and all that is some ways going to inhibit that scope for them? You know, because how are we going to now negotiate these spaces, and, you know, the kind of largeness, the visual grandeur of something large and
that means how we are affected by it.
Yes, how are you affected by that? Do you reckon that this is constraining you,
I mean,
limiting you?
I mean, it definitely will for me, and I think I have to wait and see what happens, because we are still digesting this new time and space. But it's definitely not what we want. I mean, I'm talking as a practitioner, as an artist, because, you know, there's a tactility, there's a sense of making, there's a sense of scale, which all absolutely gets lost in the web space. But I guess, as I was saying, that we do adapt and shift.
Yes.
And since we are in this pandemic and we still have this platform, you know, like 20 some years ago, we didn't even have this platform to be even sharing like what we're doing right now, or at least have a conversation with someone. So there are subtle benefits and pluses, definitely, but it definitely doesn't really replace, you know, what you make, because scale you can't see. Yeah, that tactility I was talking about, you can't see, and it's really it's really like, yeah, I mean, you want to share. So, I mean, we don't all create work in vacuum. Even if we have a studio practice, it has impacted us tremendously. I think few members, panel members have also addressed it, that, you know, you may not have access to resources or finances or your studio or your technical aspects. So you might be compromising on your scale, but you're definitely not compromising on your expression. But its actual display definitely becomes not what we envisioned when we started the work.
Exactly.
Well,
So,
Professor Mehta, one question to follow up from what you've heard from the artists is that you are involved with a university. And do you think now the universities will play a very important role? Because, you know, there are more universities in our country, definitely. There are more universities than you have more museums, you know, much more universities than museums. Do you think universities will play a crucial role in the field of all kinds of arts? I'm not just talking about visual arts, but I'm thinking about arts across the spectrum. That do you think universities will play a crucial role in the future in our country particularly?
asking me.
I'm asking Professor Mehta.
Let me just unmute.
Sorry.
That's a really wonderful question. And I think there are four aspects to this. One, obviously, in one sense, yes. And frankly, you know, if you look at the interest in young people, art and stuff, and I'm not at all pessimistic. In fact, there's an extraordinary energy and curiosity, experimentation, you know, of the kind that I certainly don't remember when we were kind of students in college, anything of that scale, right? And in that sense, right, there is a kind of audience. I think, as Matthew pointed out, I think universities will transform themselves in innovative ways as curation sites, hosting sites. I think Ashoka has already been doing all kinds of interesting, innovative exhibitions of the kind that at least very few Indian universities would have done years ago. I think the third thing which I think they can contribute is, and this is, you know, builds on something that I think the previous panelists have said, which is one of the interesting questions when we interact with young people, right, the 18 to 22-year-old age group, is this whole question of what their sense of visual experience is actually like. I mean, to me, I think the interesting challenge for art and kind of curation, all these things going ahead, is it's not so much per se, but one thing, for example, all young people have a much more three-dimensional digital sense of experience than I think most people in our generation did, right? I mean, you know, it starts with the video game, but it evolves into something else, right? And if you think of what they are looking for in a museum, right, just in terms of interface, just in terms of, it's actually very, very different. And I think one of the interesting challenges for art programs in universities, I think, going ahead, is whether they can actually look to the future rather than look to the past, right? Just say that there was a canonical model that we, or whether they can ask the question that, is there something particular happening in young people's experience, right? Visual experience, aesthetic experience, expressive, right, demands, right? That is actually best captured in university, right? Because they're coming at that age. And can we actually channelize that knowledge into thinking about museums of the future, thinking about forms of expression in some sense of the future? I think the place where the universities will disappoint, though, I think these are the three positives. But the fourth point, which is, I still don't see a great proliferation for support for art programs or programs that support artists, or, you know, art history programs or those kinds of things, right? I mean, maybe there's a couple, at least in the Indian context, a couple of universities that may actually venture down that line. But, you know, if one thinks of, let's say, even in a limited way, the kind of place that, let's say, Baroda University must have performed, right, in the 50s and 60s, Baroda School of Art or something like that. I actually don't see appetite in universities for that kind of support. Maybe it will build up, but I think that's the one kind of missing link. As I said, I think on all the three other dimensions, they're amazing places to engage with. But I don't see a proliferation of, big schools of art coming out of these universities.
You're very fortunate now. We've got Dr. Chen Das. Wang is heading a major center in Beijing. Sorry,
I'm sorry, I will have to say bye here.
Thank you very much, Pratap, for your kind participation. It's very wonderful. All the best. Thank you. And Dr. Chen, just tell us one thing, that China has just emerged from a catastrophic experience like all of us are doing currently, but you have the first experience. Now, how you are heading one of the major museums and art institutions in your country, how are you responding to the entire thing? You recently sent me a proposal about attending this great grand exhibition that you're planning. So is China really putting a lot of resources and a lot of support to further the interest of the arts at such a crucial juncture?
As you know, because the school, the museum is locked down, so we couldn't display any real works. So we just designed the digital exhibition online. So we use the special software to build up the museum in virtual model. So we put every student's works into that model. Take the photos of a student's work. We just put the student work in the virtual museum. So we use that as the graduation exhibition. It is nice because when you click the website, still you can go inside. It seems you go inside the real museum, but actually it's virtual. It is the model. So we put every student work on the inside of the museums, in the space of the museums. So people just go inside and click the direction to look at the image, even to enlarge the image, even to click some text beside the works. So we make this one, so many audience, so many people to visit this model, this exhibition, virtual exhibit. We call that a virtual exhibition.
But tell me,
it is also good.
Yes. Tell me one thing that you have. I've received a proposal from you that you're organizing a very large exhibition. Now, all the large exhibition, the art fairs, the biennales, they are all getting cancelled. So that China is really going ahead with all the big events, because there's going to be a big event in an island, as you expressed. So are you really, is your government investing that much and they're going ahead with these large projects?
This exhibition actually is planned before the epidemic last year. So it still continued to the next year. We just postponed the opening date to the next year because we believe from the beginning of next year everything is go to the normal way. So now all the people just working on that project, including that island, because that island is made by people. It is called artificial island, and because of that, so the company who built this island, they have built 8 museums in that island. So we will use 7 museums to organize a big, larger international art exhibition. So
Pratik, I'll just wait for the audio to get, and Pratik, I asked you that question, so would you like to answer that? I mean, how are you responding? How are your artists responding? Are they taking it as a challenge? Are you taking it as a challenge positively, or are you feeling constrained?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me on this panel. It's wonderful to hear all of my co-panelists speaking very lustrous. I think we've been working as hard as ever in our gallery. We've used this opportunity to really build a strong online platform for ourselves. I think we've been working harder than what we were before the pandemic, because the being on a web situation means that you have to be a global time, and time is not really it's kind of a fluid situation. So to begin with, I think by the first week we were kind of soaking things in, and then by the next 10 days we launched something called Experimental Labs. I was mentioning this before, which has 7 or 8 different wings, including something Cooperative Art Production Fund, which is a cooperative art production fund funded by artists, supporters, and the gallery to give funding up to $2,000, micro bursaries really for projects that need completion. Then we have something which we started online as well called Filament, which is an entirely online film exhibition. In fact, the first edition ends today after a month, or tomorrow after a month. Then we have something called Black Box, which is an entirely online digital endeavor in answering to Friso had a question about how digital world can be used to enhance, used as not just as a medium to communicate or a replacement medium, but as a medium to do work. So Black Box is something that is an online digital medium that will allow exhibitions or projects to happen entirely online, using sometimes internet art as well. We've been doing our online courses, our Learning Program Foundation work, which happened entirely online as well. We had one last week, which was very well done. And I mean, I think now is the time where we need to really challenge our existing ways of working. And there is need of the hour to extend ourselves beyond what we do traditionally as a gallery. I think there's a larger responsibility, especially in our context where there is little government or institutional support, to go beyond what we do as exhibitors of art or supporters of artists, but to impact the larger artist community and the entire art community. So I think we re-look at our way of looking at the thing very quickly, and with the very young, able, and efficient team, we managed to do some things that are pretty game-changing. Yeah.
Great. Matthews, just one thing from your side. Do you think this is the time that we expect the establishment, whether it's universities, whether it's the state, whether it's large corporate houses, to come forward and help the arts? Because as Friso also said, arts at at crucial junctures of history, especially at such troubled times, can become one of the most important vehicles of rejuvenation and restructuring. So do you think that there would be an effort on part of all the artists maybe congregating in smaller associations and getting the state activated and getting large corporations activated in large projects? Like China is going ahead and doing these huge, big events. We need big events also to happen. We can't be, in a state of total paranoia forever. So this is the time that we also need large support from the state. What do you feel about it?
Well, I think as I said earlier, I gave up on state support a long time ago. I do look to foundations.
That's right.
And some companies, but I really think that the companies unlike in the 70s and 80s in the United States, when there was international corporate support like Lufthansa, American Express, Polaroid, and these companies investing resources in cultural, not as marketing, but as cultural philanthropy. That was a real enterprise. That enterprise died in the late 1990s, and it's never come back. What it became, all of those cultural philanthropy were reorganized under their marketing divisions, and so that kind of support fell by the wayside in terms of only supporting projects that advance the company's corporate interests and values. But what I do think is that there are a handful of companies around the world led by individuals who have a vested interest in collecting and supporting contemporary art. And those models have been very successful, but it's not on a scale that I think is going to fill any kind of vacuum.
I think we need the
vacuum filling.
Yeah, we need the big money, like we need Bill Gates, we need Google, all of them to come forward, because even if they don't have any vested interest, purely to save society, because, you know, art is the only vehicle, all forms of art, not just restricting myself to visual art. You need orchestras.
Well, I think unfortunately, Rocky, I agree, but I think especially in the wake of a health crisis like this, health, education, and welfare are the top three concerns.
Priorities.
Not just of Bill Gates, Warren Buffett. I mean, you look at, you know, the largest foundations in the United States, the Pew Charitable Trust, the Brown Foundation, all who have a rich history of supporting culture, have re-engineered their giving programs this year to support health, education, and welfare, because those are sectors that are in severe financial and organizational crisis, and their purpose is to keep people alive. And so culture, unfortunately, we can all agree here, it's very necessary, but it's not necessary to keeping people alive, unless you're somebody who makes work, because then that's how you stay alive, is by making work. So all I'm saying is that the big money is not going to come from some big collective. It's not going to come from the state. It's not going to come from corporations. It's all about individual initiatives. People who want to turn back their extreme wealth and spend it in a way that doesn't have some big tax advantage, but it goes into supporting the kind of thing. And if you want to be really sanguine or bloodthirsty about it, you can look at it by saying the argument for them is, if you don't keep supporting the artists who you've collected, then the value of your collection is going to plummet. So if you want to keep your investment valuable, keep putting money out there so that artists and galleries can survive.
But we need philanthropy. We need philanthropy. At this stage, we need philanthropy. Do you think artist societies could associations could play a role worldwide? There are a lot of artist associations. They should come forward now and do something, because at this crucial juncture, I think a lot of support is needed. Because if the arts suddenly miss out or are neglected, it can be quite catastrophic. It'll be another catastrophic, situation, because the intellectual endeavor has to sustain itself.
Well, if I can interrupt, we have a
I think the philanthropy model.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have a question from one of our listeners, and that is, which is related to what you're discussing, which is, are artists truly considered to be responsible for unearthing the truth or make societal changes? By this, I mean, Like, for example, most of us are involved in public art. So can we say that we have an added responsibility to help communities find their voices and express their concern through individual projects?
Would the artist like to answer?
Jan?
I was saying that the very short answer, in my opinion, would be what you were just saying. It's about funding. Some of the practitioners have a very social and public art practice. That's their primary practice. But for others, we do it because it is the need. That's our contribution to our immediate local communities and societies. But it requires funding. And sometimes I think it's, I mean, so I guess short answer would be no, but personally or ethically, or when you are actually involved and passionate about something, it end up always being yes for some, you know, and those may not ever make CVs, or I mean, that's our giving, you know, maybe we may not have financial capabilities, but we may have the skill sets or perhaps some time which we are willing to invest, so we do it. But I will be very interested in hearing this from non-artist panelists, because that will be interesting to me to see like how we can even approach for such projects, because we do get involved. We may not publicize it because that's not our primary practice. So, you know, maybe Prateek or maybe Rakhi or Iti, if you can talk about this, it would be actually good for even me.
Friso, any suggestions?
I agree with you, Ina. I also, my first response would be no, because I think that then it becomes that's kind of the wrong way around for me. If that's doing the art with the purpose of finding an answer, I think it works the other way around. It's because you as an artist have an interest in a topic, in something that you realize, that you observe, that maybe the rest of us would not even see, and you work on that. It sounds a little bit banal, so pardon my English, but it so happens that you find an answer, or give an answer to a certain group of people who are looking for answers in that field.
Well, Sriyoshi, as an art practicing artist, you're also a professor of art history. You know, how do you perceive this entire thing, and what do you feel your role as an artist is at this moment?
You're talking about this particular situation, isn't it?
No, I'm just saying, how do you perceive your role as an artist in today's time? You know,
in general, yes.
At this moment, yes.
Because I'm basically a teacher, I have to devote a lot of time teaching and all. So the time what I'm left with, then I devote myself to my work, which is very private. And for me, to carry on big projects is not possible, because as I told you, I'm telling all of you that I work in a private space. And for me, then I don't look about things of this kind. I mean, I don't look forward to this kind of thing. But I feel that if someone has a project which is relevant to the situation, or the context is fitting the situation, they can easily carry on with it. Of course, they need fund and all. This is what I got from your discussion. So I cannot throw much light on this matter, because I work in a very private space where I definitely put in things which are contextual. It is not that, because art is both reality and imagination. So that is my space where I am working.
I'll tell you about one leading artist in India. I had an encounter with him. This was a very sad encounter that we had, and CIMA opened with that exhibition. Actually, it was called Wounds. It happened after the demolition of the Babri Masjid.
Yes.
And all the artists, they contributed works, and we did this big show. And it was, the suggestion came from their side. They said that we want to do this, you know, and so we organized this show before CIMA started. Actually, that was, it became our opening show, but it happened before we started. And at that time, a particular artist, his name is Ganesh Pain, a very introspective, private person. And when he was approached, he said that, look, I can't work or even suggest to work for the Times, because I don't work that way. You know, my entire thing is internalized. My life, the entire external life is internalized. All my experiences are internalized. And then I come back out with my imaginative language. And that I cannot always attune to a state of the present. You know, it's very difficult for me to do. Then eventually we got one work which he agreed to. And he said that, fine, this is a piece of work. Maybe it might be suitable to you, but this I did out of a totally different thing, but maybe this. So he refused to do. He says, I'm not responsible to society. I don't feel I'm responsible. Yes. I'm a creative person, and my creative world is my own, and my job and responsibility is to that creative world. So he, you know, there are a lot of artists who think that way.
Yes,
you know, they are not.
They do. They do, but as I told you in the beginning, when I started working before this lockdown and all, I'm still continuing with that work. My work is very painstaking. It takes months, 3-4 months to complete and of medium size. So I was doing it in my own terms, but because of this all kind of things all the time, the anxiety, the fear, I also got engrossed in that because everyone was talking about the pandemic. So I cannot distance myself from that situation. So I told you all the COVID, Corona, all these kind of things, the letters came into my compositional
Matthew, now, what is the way forward? What is the way forward? Very briefly, in 2 sentences, please. What is the way forward? What do we do? Let's start, let's end on a positive note.
Stop watching the news and start talking to your friends and colleagues, and don't listen to what everybody out there says.
Frizo?
Yes.
Frizo?
Well, I like also what Pratik said with their initiative about the black box. Let's try to find and use this time where we all are kind of confined to a new medium, explore that medium and find new ways of making use of it.
Ina?
I would say that we all have to reevaluate and definitely continue to question within, not outside. So no news, of course. And I think we should focus both on self-care and being kind to others.
Sayoshi, 2 sentences.
We should be hopeful about the situation. We should be optimistic, and we should think it over again, and I think we can overcome the situation.
Iti, are there any questions? Any more questions?
Yes, there's one question which says, considering this art world, I guess universities or art institutions should start beginning to incorporate virtual reality into some form of their art and history classes, so that students can see a painting or visit a historical site in a more tangible way. Any views on this?
Ina, you're a teacher, professor of...
I would say absolutely we must. I mean, technology definitely is a tool which we need to continue to exploit and make use of it. And I think that in this age of AI, that should be happening. It is actually happening in some of the art and design schools. So that will definitely, I mean, it's even even without the pandemic, that will be an opportunity for a lot of students to engage with the space and all the resources, museums, arts. So yes, I would say absolutely.
Well, thank you all. It's wonderful. I'll just end saying that, well, you know, art existed long time before COVID-19 did. And humans felt the need to express and communicate, and that's how, and share a kind of a visual and sensual experience with people all around. That's how art started, right from the cave times, you know. The urge to express is so fundamental that a human ceases to exist in the true sense the moment he fails to express or is forbidden to express. The desire to communicate and express is deeply embedded and coded in our DNA. Of course, acute shock and trauma may paralyze us temporarily and may overwhelm and dominate our immediate responses. We may lose altogether all interest in creative contemplation, but gradually as we limp back to normality, the need to express and communicate resurfaces, and we re-emerge, as it were, with a burst of fresh emotions, sometimes angry, at times sad, at yet other times sheer delight. All the catastrophic moments in history or in legend advance great artistic expressions, whether it be a Guernica, an epic like the Mahabharata, Wasteland by Eliot, or Mozart's Last Requiem. Great art has emanated from humankind's response to strife, acute angst, and profound realization. Therefore, art cannot suddenly dissolve or become irrelevant. It has its own rhythm of silence and euphoria. Like in the caves and human beings, they go on, artists have always constantly negotiated and maneuvered, even at the most impossible of times. Like in the caves of Cappadocia in Turkey, where thousands and thousands of fleeing refugees over many centuries took shelter and decorated the caves with pictures stemming from their life experiences and beliefs. Or the most touching literature that emerged from the tortuous cells of the Siberian gulags. Now, coming to present times, of course, it is grim. The exponential needs for healthcare and all the uncertain economic situation have gripped us as never before. Arts of such moments do appear as fanciful and unimportant. It's very natural. In our region, we have been confronted with a triple whammy. We have COVID, a super cyclone, and an influx of thousands of near destitute migrant laborers. It is truly a theater of the absurd. At this moment, art may seem irrelevant, a reckless waste and a luxury is at crossroads, the future for the hard copy books, art flourishing, futuristic architecture, fashion, design, everything seems so remote, so unnecessary, wasteful, and redundant. But of course, we heard how we can overcome these traumatic times from the wonderful speakers that we've had today. Thank you all for participating, and I look forward to again having a conversation with you in the near future. Thank you.